Today is the 61st anniversary of my husband and my uh, wedding anniversary. Today I am talking with my son Bob, my older son, who was the firstborn to our marriage when I married Malcolm Hunt. And we are going to talk a bit about where my parents were born, when they came to live on the farm in Armstrong County, Texas, and a bit about their first family, my father's first family. So my name is Audrey Bernice Caton Hunt, and my father's name was Anthony Caton. He was born December the 8th in Covington, Kentucky in 1858, and he passed away November the 5th, 1951, and is buried in Dreamland Cemetery in Canyon, Texas. He was first married at the age of 19, I believe, to Fanny Armstrong, who became Fanny Armstrong Caton, his first wife, and she was the daughter of Emily Hall Armstrong and John Armstrong. Anthony and Fanny were married in Ironton, Ohio in 1877. They lived in Lawrence County, Ohio, until they moved to Tuscaloosa, Illinois, Douglas County in 1883. The family moved to Iowa Park, Texas, in Iowa Park, Illinois in 1893. My mother's name was Maud Webb. She married my father, Anthony Caton, and became Maud Webb Caton. She was born June the 16th, 1869 in LaGrange, Texas, the daughter of Lubbock Pierce Webb and Catherine Carter Webb. Anthony and Maud, my parents, were married in Wichita Falls, Texas on September the 18th, 1904. Maud, my mother, died March the 24th, 1935, and is buried in Dreamland Cemetery in Canyon, Texas, by the side of my father, who died back in 1951. My mother, Maud Webb, had a brother and I believe 3 sisters, of whom I know a little bit about the 2 sisters and my uncle. His name was Lubbock Pierce Webb, the same as his father's, and he lived in Wichita Falls, Texas. My mother was born, as I said, in LaGrange, Texas, and I do not know a lot about her early life, but she did attend summer normal school in Austin, Texas, and became a qualified teacher.
Look at the kids.
Became a qualified teacher, having taught in Wichita Falls, Texas, in the same room for 8 years before she married my father. He also was a school teacher. I don't know where he received his credentials to teach, but he did teach in Texas. My father and his first wife were separated and divorced. They had 4 sons and a daughter. And he came to Texas, left her in Illinois, and he came to Texas with the 4 sons and his daughter. My half-sister, Mildred Caton Doak, was born in Illinois after, I think, after my mother and father divorced. And but he took care of those 2 sons, and he became a farmer down in Wichita County. And that's when I think he taught school, and then he became a county assessor in Wichita Falls. And that's where he and my mother were married back in 1904. He had been out to the panhandle of Texas where he admired the large prairie and it was a fine wheat growing country, and he wanted to become a farmer. So he bought a section of land and later a second section of land. And he had a home built. He was engaged to my mother and knew that they knew they were to be married. And so he had a house built, a new home built, fairly small, but very adequate for those years. No indoor plumbing whatsoever, no electricity. They were more or less like homesteaders. However, their home was much better than homesteaders' houses. And then he and my mother married and came to Armstrong County, Texas, about 10 miles from the fairly small town of Claude, Texas. And the larger town to the west of them was Amarillo, Texas, which was a pretty good city at that time. And my mother had been raised as a Southern lady. She had there had been help in the home, black servants, and so she became more or less a homesteader's wife, and she worked very hard on the farm because of the lack of modern conveniences. But she was a woman who never complained. She was a very wonderful personality, fairly aristocratic in her whole upbringing. Both she and my father had had a religious upbringing. My father's mother was a devout Catholic, but there was no place for him to attend a Catholic school, and she did not want him to go to public school. But at about the age of 13 or so, he left his mother's home. I think that his father died when he was fairly young, perhaps maybe 6 or 7 years old. But he left home and he made his own way in the world, and he did go to public school and gain some education. He had a great respect for education, as did my mother. And then he did marry at the age of 19, and to that union, as I mentioned before, were born 4 sons and a daughter. And he and my mother were married just about a year, living on the farm in the Fairview community of Armstrong County, Texas. And their first son was born in 1905. He was my older brother, Leland Caton. The next in line was my sister Eileen, who was born in 1907. The third child of Maud and Anthony, my parents, was Lita Caton, who was born in 1909. And then I, Audrey Caton, was born in 1911, and my brother Irvin was born in 1912. So they had a family of 3 daughters and 2 sons. And my mother worked very hard on the farm, but she had an elder sister, a bit older than she, who had no place to live in Wichita Falls because her brother had married and her sister, Kate, had married, and I think one sister had passed away. So my mother had my father promise, when she agreed to marry him, that he would make a home for her sister, whom we called Aunt Sis. My mother called her Sis, and we called her Aunt Sis. We called her brother Uncle Bud, because she called him Bud. He was Lubbock Pierce Webb. He was a publisher and worked on the Wichita Falls paper for many, many years. A very fine man who married and had only 1 daughter, who was named for my mother, Maud. My mother had this wonderful sister, Kate, who married Mr. Matheny, and they lived in Roswell, New Mexico. And my mother visited in Roswell when my sister Eileen, my brother Leland, and my sister Lita were just small children. And they visited in Roswell where the Matheny's lived. Her sister was Kate Matheny. And to that union, Kate Matheny was the mother of Maud and Mathy Matheny. Again, another relative name for my mother. My mother was a well-loved woman and admired, and she was especially dear to my cousin Maud because her mother died when she was fairly young. And Maud Matheny, she married D. Walker in Roswell, New Mexico, where they lived, and had only one son. She used to visit every summer in our home after she moved to Wichita Falls. She would come down to Claude, Texas. She would drive her own car, and she had one son. And it was a great event when Maud would come to spend several weeks with us during the summer with her son, D.C. Walker. Because we lived a fairly quiet life on the farm, but there was a community church which was more or less served by Methodist itinerant ministers, and my father and mother were devout Christians, and my father had left the Catholic Church. She had been raised in the Episcopal Church, but they both joined the Methodist Church before they were married. And so we all attended the Sunday school and church at this Fairview Community Church, and we had wonderful friends in that community. They were farmers, wheat farmers and grain farmers, raised some cattle. My father later bought a second section from a man named Killenberger. We called it the Killenberger section. And he never did have it broken out into a farming land until later, in later years. He was a hard-working man and very, very straight-laced, rather austere, and very authoritarian, as were parents, especially fathers back in those days. And he would arise early. Now, he did employ hired men. He built a bunkhouse right near our house with 2 rooms, or perhaps one big room in that bunkhouse. But he nearly always had a hired man to help with the farm work because he branched out into quite a lot of farming, and he did experimental work in grain sorghums, and he perfected some grain sorghums which had not been known before by crossbreeding or something of that sort. And he sold those sorghum seeds, you know. He would mail packages of them all over the country because he was quite well known for having developed that line of feed for cattle. And of course, we lived there on the farm, and we had heavy snows in the wintertime, and we had rather warm summers. We had no trees. It was on the plains of West Texas. My mother had grown up in South Texas and East Texas where there were beautiful trees and rolling hills, and she did miss those beautiful trees. But we raised an abundant garden. My father raised hogs. I remember him out calling the hogs, suey, 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 calling the hogs in to feed. We had milk cows. The milking was done by hand. We did not sell milk, as many people in the neighborhood had cream separators and sold cream, but the milk that we had was mostly for our own consumption. And my mother's sister, Aunt Sis, had a little room. My father partitioned off a little room in the house for her, and she worked hard, and my mother had lots of help from her, because at one time we children were 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. I believe that would be. We were 2 years apart. 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And so we always went to the Fairview Community Church, which is just about a little over a mile. We had Surrey with the fringe around the top that we went to church in. Now, we had other vehicles, we called them buggies, you know, drawn by a horse. But I think that we hitched up 2 big horses to this Surrey, and we would go to church in that Surrey. And lots of times the itinerant minister would stay at our house, and my father more or less provided his salary. Other people in the neighborhood helped to some extent, but he was, he wanted to keep that church going for the benefit of the community and for his family. And so that is where I had my first religious training and experience, and we had wonderful friends there. We would have what we called dinner on the grounds. They would move the church benches out, and we would spread food. Everybody would bring big baskets of food, and we would have dinner on the ground, as we called it. And that was a wonderful occasion, and I remember that very fondly. And there was an organ at our church, a big pump organ, and I remember the little Sunday school cards that we used to have with the pictures and stories of Jesus from the Bible. And then in the summertime, they would have revivals there at that church. We would have a minister who would come and hold a revival. And my father would have worked hard all day in the fields, and my older brother became his first assistant and worked hard too, plowing and sowing. However, as I mentioned, we did have some hired help. But they would clean up, we would eat our evening meal, and then we would go at night to the evangelical meetings over at the church. And that made a great impression on me, the wonderful singing that we had. And we sometimes had singing groups who would come into the community and put on what we called a singing meeting. And then we lived just about 1.5 miles from the Fairview School, which is a 2-room school, and that's where I and my 2 sisters and 2 brothers all started to school in the 1st grade, and in the room taught by one teacher, there was the 1st, I think, through the 6th grade, and then the other room was taught by a teacher or sometimes 2 teachers, and that went through high school. And that's where we started our education. And it is amazing how much that we did get from that early schooling. And I went to that school until I was ready for 4th grade. And then we moved to the town of Canyon, Texas, because there was a college there. And my mother and father had such a high respect for education, and they wanted us to have the advantage of going to college when we had finished public school. So when I was 9, we moved to the town of Canyon, which was just about 40 miles from our farm. And we had a fairly adequate house. We did have electricity. We didn't have, we had just coal stoves, and later on, gas was brought into the town of Canyon, and then we had gas heat. But my earliest remembrance was of the big pot-bellied heaters, and then the big kitchen range where my mother cooked. Thank you. My mother was a wonderful cook, and as I say, she did work hard. Now, in our house, we didn't have a large house, but we had one big bedroom that had 2 double beds in it and a baby crib. Then we had another room that was Papa's room. He had his own room. We had a room for Aunt Sis, my mother's sister, and then we had a room for the boys, my 2 brothers, after they became larger. As I say, we had no indoor plumbing. My mother raised chickens and turkeys. I was her helper as a little girl to go feed the turkeys. And then when it would come time to, toward Christmas, then she would sell the turkeys and to a store in Claude, Texas, where we bought most of our groceries. My father bought most of the groceries, would bring them home in the wagon. He would go to Claude, and as I say, he raised some cattle and raised hogs. And so the deep snows would come in the winter, and it was hard work because they had to put on heavy overshoes and heavy coats to get out to go feed the the cattle and horses in the morning and milk the cow. I think we just usually milked one, maybe two cows. And then my brothers and my older brother and my two sisters, of course, were a little older than I, and they had started first grade over at Fairview School. We went, although it was just a little over a mile, and sometimes in the spring and early fall we would walk to school. But most of the time we went in a buggy, which was just a little, three people could sit in the back, and then there was a little seat outside in the back of the buggy, drawn by a horse. Over at the Fairview School, they had stalls. Many of the students there, pupils we called them, had the same method of going to school. My older brother would drive the buggy, and we would drive over, and then they would put their horses in these stalls during the day while we were at school. There were outdoor toilets over there, one building for the boys, one for the girls. We would take our lunch usually in a little bucket with a handle, because we used lots of syrup and shortening, which would come in these buckets, and that's what we would have our lunch in. Our lunches, my mother made some loaves of bread, but lots of times our lunch would consist of biscuits and sausage, and she nearly always had some cookies, and we had apples. Usually we had oranges only at Christmas, and at Christmas time it was a great event. My father and older brother would go to the Paladura Canyon and cut a tree, an evergreen tree, and bring it home, and we would have a Christmas tree. One year, they couldn't get down to the canyon because of the snows. We had a big tumbleweed, which we decorated, and we saved those homemade decorations from year to year to put on our Christmas trees. And we would hang our stockings, just our regular stockings which we wore, which were just black cotton stockings, hang clean stockings up, and on Christmas morning, why, we would find fruit and candy and nuts in our stockings, which was a great event. And then oranges. We usually had oranges at Christmas. And my mother wanted us to have the pleasure of having some gifts. So that was the only time of year that we ever had gifts. We didn't have birthday gifts. My mother would make a birthday cake for everybody's birthday, but we didn't share gifts. We had gifts only at Christmas, and not very many, but what we got we were very happy with. So much of our merchandise came through ordering from Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward catalogs. We would get big orders of clothing, and then my mother would, of course, put the Christmas things away. She didn't want us, we never did, we believed in Santa Claus until we were all pretty big. We thought Santa Claus brought them. Over at the church and at the school, we would have Christmas programs with the pupils giving recitations at the school, and then over at the church, I think, perhaps we had a Christmas tree. I can't recall too much, but we had special Christmas programs at the church, and that made quite an impression on me. And then after we moved to Canyon, why, we went to the Methodist Church in Canyon, Texas, and I did not become a member of the church until I was about 16. I know we would have these evangelistic meetings, and we had all been baptized as babies in long dresses over at the country church. But I did not join the church. I remember wanting to go up and join, but I was a shy girl, and not until I was 16 did I go forward and express my wish to become a member of the church and a Christian and join the church. I had been baptized as a baby, so in the Methodist church we did not have to be baptized the second time if we had been baptized as babies. And so that was, I have very fond memories of living in Canyon and going to Sunday school. They had separate classes for the boys and the girls. I was in a group with several girls whom I went to school with, and we had a wonderful teacher. His name was Mr. Cooper, and he inspired me, I think, to make a religion and Christianity a very meaningful part of my life, because he was such a fine teacher for several girls with whom I attended school. As I say, I was in 4th grade when we moved to Canyon, and at first we went to what we called a training school. My father learned that in connection with the college they had a training school because it was to train teachers. So, although it cost some money, we all went to training school the first year. And then he found that they had a very fine public school. So the second year I went from 5th grade through high school, which public school was only 11 grades at that time. And I graduated from the Canyon public schools when I was 17. And then I entered West Texas State Normal. It wasn't called college or university, it was called a normal. And I went 4 straight years. I didn't go in the summertime, but I gained a bachelor's degree when I was in 1932. And now, I had met my husband, who was a sophomore in college when I entered as a freshman. His family had moved from the town of Wheeler, Texas, to Canyon, Texas, because of the college. They had, my husband had a brother who was 2 years older than he, and a sister about 4 years older, and we all attended West Texas State Normal. And I started going with Malcolm Hunt when I was a freshman and he was a sophomore in college. He had entered college at 16, and so we went together 5 years. He had obtained his bachelor's and master's degree when we married in 1933, and that is exactly 61 years ago today. It is now 1994. We married in 33, 61 years ago, and we had a wonderful, happy life together. He had taught school a year in New Mexico before we married. I was qualified to teach, but teachers were so plentiful that I did not get a job teaching until Christmas. I taught only from Christmas until school was out in the spring down in a rural consolidated high school in between Quanah and Childress, Texas. And then Malcolm and I, he was named Mike by his friends, young men friends in college, Mike, but his mother never called him anything except his name, Malcolm. His name was Malcolm Garrett Hunt, and he went through life as an educator as M.G. Hunt. And he became a very well-known and respected educator. He had taught in Dora, New Mexico 1 year, and then we married, and he received a teaching position in the town of Portales, New Mexico, where we lived from 1933 until 1964, 31 years. He was an instructor in the public schools and in the high school, and then he served 21 years as superintendent of schools, the longest tenure of any superintendent there in the Portales public schools. There were over 100 teachers. We had 3 grade schools, I believe, and a junior high school and public school. Of course, at that time, high school was 12 grades. And our 2 sons were born in Portales, New Mexico. Our older son, Robert, who is an educator, and a very fine one too, having attained his doctor's degree by the age of 25, and having a family of a wife and 3 children, or 2 children and 1 on the way when he obtained his doctor's degree. My husband, after serving 21 years and those 31 years in the public school, decided that he wanted a change. So there was an opening in the state in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for a vocational supervisor. He was, well, I can't think.
Vocational education.
Vocational education. He became state director of vocational education, and we lived in Santa Fe. Of course, our two sons were pretty far up in years by then. That was in 1964 that we moved to Santa Fe, and it was very hard to pull up roots from Portales, New Mexico, because we had a very fine church home there and so many friends, you can imagine, over the period of 31 years. And many, many fine friends, some of whom are still living today, but many of whom have passed away. And
well, of course, at that time, Pat and I were grown and going from home.
yes.
And you should also mention Pat's education. Pat.
Yes.
And
Our younger son, Pat, Bob, was born in 1935, and he started to school at before he was 6 years old. And then our son, Pat, our second son, was born in 1940, Patrick Caton Hunt. We gave him the family name of Caton because there was no one else to carry on that Caton name in our immediate family. My brother had married but never fathered any children, and so the Caton name was not going to be extended there. I have a bachelor brother who never married, and of course there was no follow-up for Caton, so Pat was named Patrick Caton Hunt. My father was Anthony Caton. He had only the one name, A. Caton, and we considered naming Patrick Anthony Caton Hunt, but then we decided we liked the name Patrick, and so our older son, Robert, was named for his Uncle Robert, who was my husband's oldest brother, older brother, 2 years older. My husband, there were 9 children in his family, and he was the youngest of 9 children. But he had this brother, Robert, and we named our son Robert Weldon Hunt. The Weldon came from a very close college friend of ours at West Texas State. My husband, Malcolm Hunt, played in the college band. He was vice president of the student body. He was very popular and active in all college activities. And as I have said before, I went through college with the recognition of Audrey Caton as Mike Hunt's girl. And then I became Mike Hunt's wife when we married in 1933. And so I was a homemaker. I did a little substitute teaching after we married and before our first son Robert was born. But after he was born, I devoted my full time as a homemaker and a mother, because Patrick came along about a little less than 5 years later. And so I always wanted to be at home when they came home from school. And I would go back a few years when we were going to that Fairview school way out before we moved to Canyon. My father he wanted us all to sit around the dining table, and by lamplight we studied and we worked on math, and he was sort of the instructor, you know, and he wanted us all to do well in school, and it was always my great ambition to excel, you know, and to be one of the best in my class. And so I studied hard. I was rather shy. I did not date in high school. I had lots of friends, and I took part in the pep squad, you know, supporting the athletic teams, but I did not date. In fact, I did not do very much dating ever until I met my husband Malcolm. I did date a couple of college boys when I was in high school, and then I had great friends among the high school students. There were 50 in my high school graduating class, and I graduated in 1928, and then I entered college in the fall of 28 and graduated with a bachelor's degree in 32. We had a very happy life in Portales, New Mexico for those 31 years. Very close friends, particularly among the teachers, because there were it grew to be over 100 teachers. And we shared a duplex apartment. We had a duplex apartment for $14 a month. Salaries were very low back in 1933. Our monthly salary My husband's paycheck was $54.17 a month. He actually he had a bachelor's and a master's degree, but everything cost much less, and he was supposed to get $75 a month. But in order for the teachers to have something to live on during the summer, they divided it into 12 payments, which made our monthly paycheck $54.17. Of course, that didn't last. He gradually became in a much higher bracket, and eventually, was drawing a very fine salary. And after we had lived in Santa Fe, and he was state director of vocational education and served for 5 years, we bought a home in Santa Fe, but only lived there a very few years. And when he decided he wanted less responsibility. He knew the state director of vocational education in in Colorado, and that state director wanted him to come to Colorado, to Denver, and work, as an assistant. So we moved to Denver. I never did like pulling up stakes and moving, because I put down pretty deep roots where I would live for many years, But we moved to Denver and lived there from 1968 until Malcolm, my dear husband, passed away September the 16th, 1993. I am now living in San Francisco with my sister Lita, who is 2 years older than I, but who never married. She is a businesswoman, and she has a large home in San Francisco. After my husband died, my ties in Denver were strong, but my ties with my family was stronger, because my son, Robert Weldon, Bob Hunt, is an instructor at Humboldt State University, 300 miles north of San Francisco, and he has a wonderful family, his wife Bonnie, and their 7 children, and then there are children by other marriages of Bob and Bonnie. And I wanted to be near them, and my younger son Pat is an instructor at San Francisco State University and lives in Marin County, just across Golden Gate from the city of San Francisco, and he lives there with his wife, and he is the father of 1 son and 1 daughter, and they are grown now. The daughter is married, but I do get to see him, and my 2 sons have power of attorney. Before my husband died, we got things set up so that I would be taken care of, and so we decided to go to a lawyer and put power of attorney in the hands of our 2 sons so that I could have their assistance in my later years. I am now 83 years old. Although I do not feel that old, I am in fairly good health, and I still have a zest for living and a deep religious faith which sustains me through my life in all manners. And that kind of brings a short history of my father and my mother and my 2 brothers and 2 sisters up to date. Surviving now is just 1 brother who is a bachelor in Arkansas, and my sister Lita Caton, who never married and lives in San Francisco, with whom I live. My older sister Eileen died in 1971. My older brother Leland Caton, who was the firstborn to the union of Maud and Anthony Caton, he was born in 1905, and he passed away in 1993. 92. But I have many happy memories of my early life. It wasn't an easy life on the farm, but we had, my mother was a wonderful personality. She was very kind, and my father was just such a worker. He believed in the work ethic. He wanted to get everything done, and he was a really very fine provider. We did not have luxuries in our life, but we were happy without them. We didn't know what luxuries were at that time. We had plenty to eat always and clothes to wear, and my father did this for us. He wanted us to have the opportunity to see another side of life than just living on the farm and going to Fairview School. So he bought Chautauqua tickets every summer. There would be a summer Chautauqua program in Claude, Texas, with very fine lectures and plays and musical entertainments. He would buy season tickets, and we would go every night to the Chautauqua for about 2 weeks, and that was a great event in our life. And another great event in our life, he was a devout Mason. He was a 32nd degree Mason. He was a Shriner. He was a member of the Knights Templar, affiliated with the organizations in the town of Amarillo. And so there would be a big Shriners parade and picnic, and we would all go to the town of Amarillo, which was, we thought of as quite a city at that time. And it was quite an event to go to Amarillo and go to the Shriners picnics and to the circus. He believed in taking his children to a big circus whenever it was available. So we went to see Ringling Brothers Circus in Amarillo. I also recall going with my family to see harness races, in which they had the little vehicles drawn by horses, and they would race around the tracks as we have horse racing today. But and I don't remember too much about that, but we did attend those races sometime. I think maybe at the time the Shriners were having their big celebrations. And my father had very fine friends in Amarillo, wealthy friends, and he liked to visit with them, and we bought our first car that we had was a Dodge car. And when I was 6 years old, we had this Dodge car, and we went to Colorado, where I lived later for many years, to see my father's half-sister, Aunt Mary Beeman. And we visited her in her home in Cheraw, Colorado. She had a son, Philip, and 2 daughters, one of whom was Dovey Basinger. She was Dovey Beeman, and she married a man named Stacy Basinger. And then they lived in Colorado after we lived in Denver, and I became quite friendly with them. And so we had, I have lots of happy memories of friends and relatives. These half-brothers never lived in our home that I remember, my father's first family. They were more like uncles to me. He had a son named Cecil Caton, who had a wife, and they had a big family of children. And then Earl Caton, who was my favorite. Well, he was a half-brother, but he was more like an uncle because he was old enough to be our uncles. And he had a very fine wife and a son and a daughter that we were very close to, and they have all passed away now. I am the only, in the Hunt family there were 7 sons and 2 daughters, one of whom died in infancy. Those 7 sons, including my husband, are all dead. I am the only surviving wife. I am the matriarch of the Hunt family. My husband's parents were Molly and A.H. Hunt. They were very fine people. He was a merchant in Canyon, Texas. They lived near the college, and of course I have many happy memories of visiting with them. And then with the families of my husband's brothers, there are still some several nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews left from the Hunt side of the family, and also from the Caton side of the family, that is from my half-brothers and sisters. I have 3 surviving nieces who were the daughters of my one was the daughter of my half-brother Cecil, the oldest one of my father's first family. And then she has a brother Gene, who is my nephew. I just have 1 surviving nephew and 3 surviving nieces. And of course from my immediate family, my brothers and sisters never, my own brothers and sisters never had any children. So here I am down in 1994, and I am the great-grandmother now of 2 little boys, one of whom is Nathaniel Malcolm Hunt, and the second one is William Orion Hunt. He was born only June 28th, just a few short days ago, it seems, in 1994. And I am visiting in the home of Robert and getting to see this new great-grandson, who is the son of a 19-year-old grandson of mine. The mother is 18. They're very fine young parents, and this is a very beautiful little boy that I am getting to see for the first time. I will return to San Francisco tomorrow on Sunday and be back with my sister where I live. Two of my granddaughters are going with me, one of whom is driving a car, Tanya Renee Hunt, and she is a wonderful young woman of 25. I have another granddaughter who is 29, Tracy, who lives in the city of San Francisco. And the other great-grandchild is the son of Robert Malcolm Hunt. And he lives in Pacifica, south of the city of San Francisco, just a suburb. And he has this one little son, Nathaniel Malcolm, who will be 2 in November. And I have very happy experiences with these new little great-grandchildren, as well as with my many granddaughters and grandsons of my older son. My older son, Robert, is the father of 10 children, having had 3 children by his first wife when he was married to his high school sweetheart, Catherine Akers. They have a very fine first family, Robin Hunt, who is 38, and Shauna Hunt Rohrbach, who lives in Colorado. She is 34, and then the son Robert, who lives in Pacifica, who is 32, Robert Malcolm Hunt. And then after he and Bob and Catherine were married for several years, they divorced, and he married Bonnie West. And Bonnie had 3 children by a first husband, John West. And so together then, they have a large family of children, because after Bob and Bonnie married, they had 7 children, the oldest of whom is Tracy Hunt, 29, and then there is Tanya Hunt, who is 27, and Talisha Hunt, who is 24, Michael Adlai Hunt, who is 21, Dylan Anthony Hunt. There's the Anthony coming from my father, Anthony Caton. Dylan Anthony Hunt is 19 years old, and he is the father of this new little baby, William Orion Hunt. His wife is Mika, and she is a very fine young woman of 18 years. They are young parents, but they are doing a wonderful job of parenting this new baby. And then next after Dylan comes Ashley Rachel Hunt, who will be a senior in high school next year. She is still living in the home here with Bob and Bonnie in Arcata, California, the home of Humboldt State University. Ashley will be 17 in July. She's a very fine student. And then the youngest of this family is Sierra Jean Hunt, who will be 13 in September. She will go into 7th grade. She's a beautiful young girl, just blooming, and be 13 the 4th of September. She was born in 1981. I can recite the birth dates of all 10 children, and the birthdays approximately of the 3 children that Bonnie had when she married Bob. Kim, Marty, and Johnny West. They are all married, and Kim has 3 children. She is married to Daniel Caslin, and they live in
Owensboro.
Kentucky. And then the next daughter is Marty, who lives in Belleville, Illinois. She is married to Scott. And then Johnny, who is married and also lives in Belleville, Illinois. He is a pharmacist and is married and has 2 children. And Bonnie's mother is the most wonderful person. She has survived 2 husbands, and she lives in Belleville, Illinois. Her name is Roberta, and she's a wonderful personality, and had a 75th birthday this past December, and had all of her family, and she has 2 sons and 2 daughters, I believe, and they were all there with their children, and they put on some wonderful skits, and it was a great celebration for her because, as I say, she's an outstanding personality, and she has very fine 2 sons and 2 daughters. 3 sons, yes. I forgot about the son Robert, who is a younger son. He is a college professor in Virginia, has his doctor's degree, and really is a very fine, educated person, and married a very fine young woman, Amy, and they have 2 daughters. And then Kim has 3. She has a daughter, Claire, and who is the age of Ciara, Bob and Bonnie's youngest child. And then she has a little boy, Ryan Caslin. And the 3rd child born is Noah Lincoln, a very charming little fella of about 2.5 years old, I believe. And her husband is a young lawyer and is a very successful provider for his family of 3. Then Marty is a charming young woman who is married but has no children. She lives in Belleville, and she's very dear to Mike and me. She was very wonderful. She visited in our home in Denver. And then Johnny, whom I do not know too well, but I feel as though he's just one of my grandsons, and his children are my great-grandchildren. The 2 great-grandchildren I mentioned are from the Hunt side. These other great-grandchildren came down from John West, but they too are my great-grandchildren. So,
Well, Mom, this is quite wonderful to have this conversation with you, or rather dialogue, or rather monologue for the most part. And I appreciate your willingness to do this, and as well as your beauty. And I congratulate you on your 61st anniversary. I had the delightful pleasure of being with you and Dad last year at this time on your 60th anniversary,
right.
when one of those granddaughters, Shauna, sent over 60 roses.
Beautiful roses. And yes, we're very fond of our granddaughter Shauna because she was our only Colorado grandchild. We were living in Denver, and she lived in Boulder and in Lyons, Colorado, and she's married to a wonderful man named Steve Rohrbach. They have no children. Her older sister, who was Bob's firstborn child from his and Catherine's union. Catherine was his high school sweetheart, whom I mentioned, and she was the daughter of a very fine Presbyterian minister, the only child of her. Her father is dead. Catherine's father, the minister, passed away, but her mother is living in Portales, New Mexico, and she's a very friendly and well-known person, and has a large circle of friends and acquaintances. And then the son, the youngest of those 3 children, as I mentioned, lives in Pacifica, and he graduated from San Francisco State University, where our younger son teaches, as did also Robin, the older girl, graduated with highest honors from San Francisco State University. Bob and Bonnie's oldest daughter, Tracy, graduated with a very fine academic record from Humboldt State University, where her father is a math instructor. Bonnie is a wonderful person. She has a deep Christian faith, and she is a very fine mother, and has influenced to a great extent her children, as well as our son Bob, the father of these 7 children that Bonnie and Bob have raised, and so we are all very happy and loving. There's love between all of us. Our son Patrick is married for the 3rd time. From his first union to Janelle Ziegenhorn was born Stephanie Lane Hunt. She is now married to a young man named Steve Bailey, and they are living in Texas. And Janelle, Pat's first wife, is remarried to a very fine man in Texas, and he is a cattleman, and they live on a ranch, and Steve and Stephanie live and work on that ranch down in Texas. Now, Stephanie graduated from the college down in Santa Cruz, and then Pat's second wife was Bobby Ann Wilson, after he and Janelle were divorced, but there's no walls built between anyone because of divorces. We are all a loving, open family. He married Bobby Ann, and to their union was born a very fine young son whose name is Kia Caton Hunt. That's where the Caton comes back in again. His father is Patrick Caton Hunt, and he is Kia Caton Hunt. He graduated with honors from Redwood High School in Marin County and will attend college at the University of California in Berkeley this next year as a freshman. And then these beautiful granddaughters. I have so many granddaughters. They are in the majority over the grandsons. There are only 4 grandsons, but multiple granddaughters.
Pastor.
Huh?
Susie. Mention Susie.
Oh yes, Pat's the 3rd wife, and present wife is Susie Nissen, a very charming young woman who is a college administrator in a college in Sacramento, California. And although she lives there during the week, she and Pat are very much in love, and they are together every weekend. Either he goes to Sacramento to be with her, or usually she comes down to Marin County, across the Golden Gate from San Francisco, and she just fits in with our family so well. We just all have such great love for each other. Love is the greatest thing in the world. It comes from our faith and belief in Christ, the only Son of God. And we all have that strong belief in God and in His Son, Jesus Christ, who's now living with His Father in heaven. I have such a great love for my husband. I loved him in life, and I love him in death. And he is so much a part of me. He just had so many fine qualities. He just was known by so many educators, even over the nation. He used to attend the American Association of School Administrators, and he met many fine superintendents and educators from over the United States. And he has received much acclaim in his profession of vocational education. And he just is living in us all. He is the father, and got a lot of this family started, which we now have. And so we just all love and revere him. Although he is gone from this earthly body, he is now in heaven with his soul and his spirit.
Okay, Mom, thanks again. We'll take a break here, and we've got an hour's worth of wonderful memories.
Okay, what I did?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And we might come back a little later and have you talking a little bit with one of those granddaughters or some of the other members of the family. So we'll take a break here and give you a break.
Okay.
Once again, I appreciate very much your taking the time and your wonderful memory for details and so forth. And so thanks very much. I love you.
I love you, Bob.